Okay, so there's a famous story of the Rebbe Rashab, who was 4 or 5 years old. He came to his grandfather on his birthday, to see his grandfather Tzemach Tzedek on his birthday, and he came crying, asking him, how come Hashem appears to Avraham Avinu, as we learn in this week's Torah portion, and Hashem does not appear to him? So the previous Rebbe relayed this story, and the Rebbe commented that we know he was at least 4 years old because he started going to school at 3.5. The Tzemach Tzedek passed away when he was 5. So he must have been 4 or 5 years old. And when he was 3.5, he went to school, so he must have been in school already. So when he was 4 or 5 years old, he's crying, how come Hashem doesn't appear to him? So Tzemach Tzedek responded, when a Jew is 99 years old and makes a decision to circumcise himself, he deserves that God should appear to him. That's one version. The Rebbe Rashab didn't remember if it was this version or a slightly different version. When a Jew is at tzaddik, when a Jew at tzaddik is 99 years old and makes a decision to circumcise himself, then he deserves that Hashem should appear to him. So the meaning of 99 versus 100, it says in the Mishnah that when a person's 100 years old, it's as if they are dead and they have left the world. They're batum and ha'ilam. They're no longer in the same way in this world. But the word world in Hebrew is related to the word concealment. So it's not a negative thing. 100 years old means you reach the level of spirituality. That's what 100 represents, where there's no concealment of godliness anymore. You're able to see things clearly. So the Rebbe Rashab was told by his grandfather that Avraham Avinu wasn't at that level yet. He was almost at that level. He's at 99 years old. And he made a decision to circumcise himself, and therefore he deserved Hashem to appear to him. The circumcision for Avram was his main mitzvah. Adam Rishon, Adam got 6 mitzvahs, Noach had a 7th mitzvah, and the mitzvah associated with Avram, which means this is his main thing, was mitzvah of circumcision. Until he got the mitzvah of circumcision, whatever he did till that point was missing something. The circumcision, this mitzvah, granted perfection in all the things that Avraham Avinu did until this point. And this gives us a lesson, as great as you may be, as long as you haven't reached 100, not only have you not finished your job, you have to do something which is really important and that will bring perfection to everything you've done until now. So the Tzemach Tzedek there's 2 versions of what the Tzemach Tzedek said. Either he said when a Jew is a tzaddik and decides to circumcise himself, he deserves to see Hashem, or when a Jew is 99 years old, he deserves to see Hashem. These 2 versions of the Tzemach Tzedek's words are both important, even though you'd think that within $200 you have $100. In other words, the version where the Tzemach Tzedek says, even if you're 99 years old and even if you're a tzaddik, and yet you realize you have to circumcise yourself, then you earn that Hashem should reveal himself to you. It would seem that version includes the other version. Not only if you're 99 years old and you're a regular Jew, do you have to decide to circumcise yourself. Even if you're 99 years old and you're a tzaddik, you still have to realize that there's something that you're missing. But the Tzemach Tzedek said one of them, but the fact that we have 2 versions means that there's a message from both of them. One of the novelties of the mitzvahs that we do post-Sinai, after the Torah is given, is that God himself invests himself in our commandments. God himself commands us to keep these mitzvahs. Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, our forefathers before the Torah was given, they kept the mitzvahs because their decision to keep the mitzvahs. They're missing something divine in their mitzvahs. When Hashem gave us the Torah, as he said when he said the first words at Mount Sinai, I, my soul, I give my essence with giving the Torah. So there's something about the giving of the Torah and the mitzvahs we do that connect to God's essence. At the level of God's essence, it doesn't matter if we're a tzaddik or we're not a tzaddik, because one chassid once said, In a place where Adel doesn't get you closer, grub doesn't make you farther. In a place where being more refined doesn't make you closer because it's infinite, being coarse doesn't make you more distant. So if we're talking about a mitzvah, like the mitzvah of circumcision, which had some comparison, some relationship to the mitzvahs that we do after Mount Sinai, as we learned earlier on this week, it was a physical mitzvah, and the holiness of Hashem remained in that mitzvah even after the mitzvah was done. So at that level, it doesn't matter if you're a tzaddik or not. It's about Hashem giving you a mitzvah. Atzilus, the highest world, and Asiya, the lowest world, and compared to God's infinite light and compared to God's essence, are all the same. That's the meaning of the first version of Tzemach Tzedek's words. Doesn't matter what level you're on, if you're a tzaddik, you're not a tzaddik. The second version is, as a second insight, it's about our personal service of Hashem and how we feel. No matter how much we've accomplished, we have to realize how much more there is to do. And the lesson we have from this teaching of Tzemach Tzedek is how powerful our mitzvahs are. A mitzvah connects us with Hashem, and not just while you're doing the mitzvah, but as the Alter Rebbe said, the bond you have with Hashem whenever you do a mitzvah remains forever. As everyone once explained, that for a father, when a child kisses the father, the father cherishes that. It touches something in the father that's doesn't need to be remembered, meaning it goes into the DNA, it goes into the very core of the father. In a similar way, our mitzvahs, which every Jew says the bracha before performing a mitzvah, doesn't matter what status you're on spiritually, every Jew recites. Oh, I don't know if you were speaking. Let me put the sound on over there. Every Jew performs mitzvahs, and every Jew says a bracha before performing a mitzvah. And every Jew says the words, God has sanctified us with his commandments, and he has commanded us. My God, our God, the King of the world, and I say this bracha, and a bracha can only be said if it's absolutely certain. If you're not sure if you should say a bracha or not, you shouldn't say it. And so every Jew says a bracha that God has sanctified me with his commandments. And the word commandment, and again in Hebrew, means connection. So it's certain that when I do a mitzvah, I am being connected to Hashem. And you might think that since, wow, you got it made, connecting with God himself. So therefore, the story that Rebbe Rashab tells us that no matter what level you're on, you have to know you always need to circumcise yourself. And when you decide that you're missing something, then, as the Tzemach Tzedek says, then you deserve that God should appear to you in a similar way that God appeared to Avram, that Avram was merited to see the essence of godliness. Avram merited to have prophecy, to witness something of the essence of godliness. Okay, that's the second talk that Rebbe gave this Farbrengen, and now Rebbe goes on to discuss something very fascinating about the story in the beginning of this week's Torah portion. If you recall, in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Avram Avinu is talking to God. God reveals himself to Avram. And in the middle of this conversation, Avram sees three angels who are disguised as regular people, and he tells Hashem, or he leaves Hashem to greet his guests. And the Talmud says we learn from this story that it's greater to greet guests than it is to experience the revelation of the Shekhinah, which Avram left the Shekhinah, he left God's revelation to greet his guests. Now, the way you read this story in a simple level, Avram Avinu didn't really do the mitzvah of having guests, because the people he invited weren't really people. They were angels. We didn't need his food. And some people say, some commentators say that the angels only appeared to eat, they didn't really eat. But even if you say they did eat and they did drink, because as the Talmud says, when you go to a place, you have to adopt the customs of the place, and therefore the angels did what people do. They pretended they did eat, they did drink, but they didn't need to eat or drink. So Avram didn't really do something that was a mitzvah. He didn't really do something that was meaningful. So why would God do something which was supernatural? He made these angels appear like guests, like regular people. Avram was used to seeing angels. What was unique over here was that the angels looked like people. why would God do something which is unnatural to accomplish something which wasn't even true? And even more, Avram didn't really do the right thing, it would seem. You're supposed to leave Hashem's revelation to greet guests, but these weren't really guests. These were just angels. So it would seem that Avram did a sin. Maybe it's inadvertent, he didn't know he was doing a sin, but it still was a sin. And we know that our forefathers were called a chariot to godliness, and the Talmud says that Lo Yu'unu L'Tzaddik L'Avon, a tzaddik never makes a mistake. So how could it be that Avram Avinu made a mistake by leaving God's presence to go take care of these guests? He didn't really help them at all. They didn't need they didn't need him to welcome them because they didn't eat or drink. So Avram Avinu leaving Hashem would seem not only is not a mitzvah, it's the opposite. Let's say, for example, Avram Avinu would give charity to poor people, and the halacha is you have to give charity to certain people, and certain people now you're not allowed to give charity to. Let's say Avram Avinu gave charity to people who are not, you're not supposed to give charity to. We would have a question. How could it be that a tzaddik would make such a mistake? Why would God allow that to happen to a tzaddik, even by accident? So, but at least, even if you're not supposed to give charity to poor people who aren't going to use it for good things, whatever that means, but at least they're poor. In this situation, these angels aren't even the category of human beings. They're totally removed from the whole realm of guests. So how could it be that the Torah, which is called the Torah of truth, teaches us a law that you're supposed to welcome guests from something which isn't true, from what Avram Avinu did for these angels? So we have to say that although these angels only appeared like people, they weren't actually people. But since the Torah of truth teaches us that we have to honor our guests from this story, we must say that there was some mitzvah of having guests that was really done in truth, and that's why we're able to learn something from the story. How could this be? So the explanation of this is like this. And here you see something fascinating. The Rebbe says, you see how the Hasidic explanation and the explanation in Nigla, the esoteric and exoteric parts of Torah are really one. What's the difference between, in other words, you can't explain this just looking at the exoteric parts of Torah. You have to look at the esoteric to explain this part of the Torah. It doesn't make sense without this. What's the difference between the mitzvahs that were done before the Torah was given and the mitzvahs that were done after the Torah was given? The mitzvahs that were done before the Torah was given were done physically. Our forefathers did physical things, but the focus wasn't the physical action. The focus was the spiritual light that they were connecting to. So they didn't do the same kind of mitzvahs that we do, the exact precise formula of the actions, the physical actions that they didn't have to mirror the mitzvahs that were done after Mount Sinai, because the purpose wasn't to impact the physical world. So let's say, for example, the mitzvah of tefillin. In our tefillin, it says a story of leaving Egypt. They didn't have tefillin that said the story of leaving Egypt because the Jews weren't in Egypt yet. But it doesn't mean that they only did this spiritually. They did something physical, but the physical thing they did wasn't the focus. The focus was what they connected to spiritually while they're doing something physical. So, for example, the Zohar says that in the story of Jacob peeling the sticks, Yaakov accomplished something similar to what we do when we put on tefillin. And yet those sticks did not remain holy. Interesting that Rebbe mentions this Farbrengen. I think this is a unique point mentioned here, not mentioned anywhere else. Always Chassidus says that the sticks of Yaakov did not have any holiness. The Rebbe says it's difficult to say that they didn't have anything that happened to him. Yaakov probably did change those sticks to some extent if he achieved a divine revelation similar to the mitzvah of tefillin, so probably there was something that changed in those sticks as well. But either way, the point is that our forefathers could not set the spirituality of the mitzvah to remain etched in the physical actions that they did. And this is the difference between our forefathers and the souls called Leviathan. There are some coals which are called Levyasan, and there's some tzaddikim which are called Shir Haber. There's some fish-like souls, if you will, and some ox-like souls. The Alter Rebbe writes famously in the Maimer of Shmi and Levyasan Yitzhak Tzachim, there are some souls that, although they're obligated to keep all the mitzvahs, but they didn't do all the mitzvahs. And although they didn't do all the mitzvahs, they were able to draw down to the world the spiritual light of those mitzvahs. So, for example, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is in the cave for many, many years. He didn't have matzah in the cave. He couldn't do the mitzvah of matzah. And yet, he was able to reveal godliness and draw down the spiritual energy of matzah without eating matzah. So it sounds like that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was doing something similar to Avraham, but there's a difference. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai didn't do anything physical. Avraham did. Avraham did do something physical because it says Ma'isa Avasim Labanim, the action of the forefathers is a sign for the children. So you have to say that Avraham did do things to cause and prepare for the giving of the Torah. It's just that at the time that Avraham did the physical things, the physical world wasn't a vessel for the things that he was doing. But there was a focus, there was an attachment, there was something that he was addressing by doing something physical to prepare for the giving of the Torah. Unlike the souls, which are called the Vyasan, Leviathan-like souls, they have no connection at all to physical actions, and their mitzvahs were only done in a spiritual plane. So this explains why it didn't matter how they did the mitzvahs. It didn't matter what they were doing physically, because the focus wasn't on what our forefathers weren't focused on what kind of film they had. They're peeling sticks instead of wearing film. Their film didn't have the Torah portion about leaving Egypt. Didn't matter, because they were just it says the actions of the forefathers are a sign for the children. It's just a sign. It's just a preparation. It's not exactly the same thing. It doesn't have to be the same thing. It's only preparation. We have similar things, similar phenomena, even post-Sinai. We find in many prophecies that Hashem told a prophet to say a prophecy, and at the same time, Hashem told the prophet to do something physical to bring that prophecy to fruition. For example, God told the prophet Ezekiel, Yecheskel, lie on your left side, lie on your right side, make vessels for the exile. And then he told them the prophecy of the exile. Why do you have to do anything? What was the point of him doing something? The Chassidus explains that it's possible for the prophecy to remain in a spiritual plane and not to come to the physical. And the physical action was meant to bring the prophecy from the spiritual plane and to connect it to the physical. And that would assure that the prophecy would eventually be fulfilled physically. Parenthetically, Rebbe told us once to Dr. Zellickson that Rebbe said to him that it says in the Torah that a kohen eats the food of the sacrifices, and the owners of the sacrifice are forgiven, are atoned for. And Rebbe was telling him that Rebbe gave him something to, I think it was by Tzimchas Torah, maybe it was wine, maybe it was something else. So he should eat this, and this will cause a refuah, this will cause a healing for his patients. But in general, with Dr. Zellickson, Rebbe told him many, many different things to do that didn't seem to have any relationship to being healed physically, to the extent that many times Dr. Zellickson, patients would come to him, he needed to know, did the Rebbe send you? If the Rebbe sent people to him, then he knew just like whatever he would say would work. But there still wanted it to be something physical that he would advise him to do, to draw down the bracha of Hashem through some kind of physical means in nature. So in a similar way, prophets didn't do something in nature, but they had to do something physical to draw the prophecy down. So since the whole point was just to somehow connect the prophecy to the physical world, it didn't matter what they did. They just had to do something that mirrored what the prophecy was about. So Yecheskel had to just make vessels of exile, whatever that means, in a state when he's not in the exile, things are peaceful, do something towards the direction of exile to make the exile happen. So in a similar way, our forefathers, although their actions were only a preparation that empowered their children, but they had to do something physically, but only a little bit. It didn't have to be exactly the same way. It's kind of like how the Rebbe says about the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov, he would sometimes knock on a door and walk away. He had to do something to make a vessel for what he needed to accomplish, but not to actually go all the way. That was enough of a vessel for him to accomplish whatever he needed to accomplish for the person behind the door. Anyway, so Hashem told Avram, for example, walk throughout Israel, go walk through the length and breadth of Israel, and that will empower your children to conquer Israel. So the point we're saying is that the mitzvahs that our forefathers did prior to the giving of the Torah, even though they had to be physical, but it wasn't so important that it was done in the physical. It wasn't so important the details of what happened in the object they were doing. And this explains our question about Avraham Avinu welcoming these angels, which seems to be not true, and we're learning lots of true things in the true Torah from the story. And the answer is like this: although they were truly angels, but since to Avram they appeared like people, and therefore this revealed in Avram his feeling of kindness, and therefore he actually did actions of kindness. He ran to slaughter a calf and to feed them. So in his action of welcoming the guests, he empowers us also, because this was similar to all the mitzvahs that he did. It wasn't about the impact in the physical. It was about his action in the physical. It wasn't about what the consequence of the action is. It wasn't about the result of the action. All the mitzvahs the forefathers did were all about their actions vis-a-vis their input, not about what happens later. So Avram Avinu shows us how to be kind, and that exhibition of kindness is something we learn from. And so the angels may have appeared like people, and so the angels appeared like people, and so people saw Avram Avinu doing kindness to people. He did an action of kindness. From his perspective, what was he doing? He was doing an action of kindness, physically, although they didn't need to receive the kindness. But from his perspective, he was doing a physical action, and he was welcoming his guests, and therefore that does empower us to do mitzvahs physically. He did something physically, and therefore it accomplishes something physically. And we learn from Avram the halacha, you do leave the Shekhinah, you leave the revelation of Hashem to greet guests. Now, you may say that, well, it wasn't really a mitzvah. On the other hand, the level of the divine presence that he was experiencing was also not similar to the revelation of Hashem after the giving of the Torah either. So both the revelation wasn't on the same level and the mitzvah wasn't on the same level. So for the level of the divine revelation he was experiencing, it was worth it for him to leave the revelation to greet the guests. So he wasn't doing a sin by leaving Hashem and going to greet the guests, because at that time, what's the perfect way of doing the mitzvah? It's a spiritual mitzvah. It has to have some connection to the physical. So that's what the mitzvah was. That's the criteria of a mitzvah at that time. It's not about the impact. It's about the action. Okay, so that's a basic point that shares at this Farbrengen. And then adds then another possible idea. It's a hadarach efsher. Maybe you could say, at what point did Avram Avinu feel bad that he didn't have guests? It seems very weird in the story. Hashem makes a sun to be hotter than a regular day, so there shouldn't be any guests. And all of a sudden Hashem says, "Oh, let me send him guests," because Avram felt bad. The Rebbe says the reason Avram felt bad was because he experienced this revelation of Hashem. Before he experienced the revelation of Hashem, he was kind when someone was around and needed kindness. But the revelation of Hashem caused him to feel bad, and even when there's no one around to do kindness for, he feels empty, I need to do kindness. He only had that feeling after Hashem revealed himself to him. It's kind of similar to the way the Chassidus explains the Bin HaMalchus Rosh Hashanah. Chassidus says that to create, we need to coronate Hashem as king on Rosh Hashanah. We need to build God's sovereignty. There are the 6 midas, the 6 attributes, the 6 feelings from Chesed to Yesod. But on Rosh Hashanah, we have to build God's sovereignty by accepting upon ourselves Hashem as our king. we, so to speak, cause God to want to be a king, and thus create and build God's desire for sovereignty and the sphere of Malchus. The other attributes are called in Chassidus Helm Shesh Metzias. They are something that exists in a hidden way, and therefore they don't need anyone to inspire them and create them. But the idea of being a king, the idea of being the desire to be a king is something which, although you may possess that feeling deep within you, but that feeling is so deep and so hidden, it's called in Chassidus something which is hidden, that does not yet exist. And therefore, in order to trigger that feeling, there has to be someone on the outside, there have to be the Jewish people that say to Hashem, we want you to be our king. So regarding Avram Avinu felt bad that he didn't have guests. Why did he feel bad? Because he had in him this feeling of kindness that was already in the realm of existence. Yeah, it was hidden, but it still existed already. And therefore, when Hashem revealed himself to Avram, that revealed that feeling of Avram, oh my gosh, I have no guests right now. I want to have guests, and therefore Hashem sent these angels disguised as men. So we learn from all this, the Torah is telling us the kind of kindness that Avraham had, and this teaches us that when a person is inspired, it may be you're inspired because Hashem inspires you, but you have to right away connect it to something. Just like Avraham, he had experienced revelation of Hashem, and right away he felt kindness, and he right away did something physically. He ran to do something. And this empowers us also after giving the Torah. When you get inspired, the Rebbe says you have to right away do something with it, because if you don't do something with it, you're going to lose it. And just like Avraham Avinu, even though he, at the time he experienced revelation, he couldn't actually do a mitzvah in a way that it permeated the physical, because the world before the Torah was given wasn't a vessel for it. But by him doing something, that empowered his children to be able to do something as well. So even though you may think that you don't have the proper receptacle for this inspiration, Hashem sends you something and you don't have the ability to actually go all the way to the touchdown line. But when you have an inspiration, you have to right away do something with it. Even though you know truly you can't actually, you're not able to totally go all the way with it, but you have, in order to hold on to that experience, hold on to that light, you have to do something. So the Rebbe concludes. The Rebbe said this Farbrengen on Shabbos afternoon, the time of Mincha, which is called time of divine grace. And that's why before we open the Torah, before we open the Ark, on Friday afternoon, we say, may it be a time of divine grace, because it is a time of divine grace on Friday afternoon. And we say, Elokim b'rav chasdecha, Hashem with your great kindness. Even the attribute of justice on Friday afternoon is transformed to kindness at that time. So in order that the inspiration of Shabbos should go into the week, Shabbos and the week, the Rebbe says, are compared to our forefathers and the children of our forefathers. Shabbos is called in Kabbalah the attribute of understanding and the intellect. It's higher than the 6 days of the week. And Shabbos blesses the days of the week. So just like our forefathers empower us. So we have to take the inspiration of Shabbos in general and the inspiration of Shabbos afternoon with something practical, so that this inspiration of Shabbos, this higher kind of inspiration, should continue and be a sign for the children. What are the children the days of the week? Whatever's happening on Shabbos may be inspired. Therefore says, take the inspiration of Shabbos, take the inspiration of the level of the forefathers, this higher inspiration on the level of Bina, and bring it down to the 6 meters, do something right now. There, but says make some kind of decision so that it should inspire the rest of the week. All right, that's how they concluded, and we will have a wonderful Shabbos. Shkoyach.